that going?
So, Marcy, when your father was at the Brickman, you did spend time here in the summers?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My entire, I'm gonna lift this up a little bit. Yeah, I spent from the time I was 2 to the time I was 20. I spent my summers in the Catskills. So yeah, good times.
I think we're live. Yes, we're live. Okay, and I'm going to let people in.
Oh, we actually see them.
If you'd like, I could make the screen. Let's see, we could do a speaker view like that.
Those are your parents?
All right, we're going to get started in 1 minute. Everybody, thanks for coming. Mary Page, I'm the director of the library. Thanks for coming to tonight's program. We have Marcy McCreary here now, who wrote a story about our local history here. So welcome, and just sit tight. And at the end, we will unmute everybody. And if you have a question, or during the program, if you think of a question, you can put it in the chat. And we will bring that to Marcy at the end. Okay. All right. So hang on just a moment.
You'll tell me when to start, Mary Page?
Yeah, we're getting there. We're close. Let's see if anybody else registered at the last minute, which is. Oh, we're good. Okay. I can hear the church bells ringing outside. It must be 6 o'clock. Both church bells. They like to do it at the same time. Okay, got another person coming in. Give it 1 more minute. Marcy, you'll talk about how people can get your book other than the library.
Absolutely. I mean, you can obviously get it on any online retailer, but most bookstores do carry them, and libraries. So, and if your bookstore doesn't carry the book, you can certainly ask for it, and they will order it for you so that you can support your local independent bookstore in that way, or library. So yeah, so really, I mean, wherever books are available is where you can get the book, and it's also available on audio. So right now what's out is the hardcover, the ebook, the audio book, and there's also a large print edition. So although the paperback doesn't come out for another few months, if you need a large print edition, that is available, again, bookstore or online retailer. So however you need to get it, they'll get it.
That's good. All right, I will watch the waiting room, see if anybody else comes in. But Lynn, I'm going to turn it over to our board president, library board president, Lynn Skolnick, to introduce Marcy. Thanks, Marcy.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Lynn Skolnick. I am the president of the Ethelbert B. Crawford Public Library Board of Trustees, and it is my pleasure to welcome you tonight. I'm going to just give you a little background of how I came to Marcy McCreary. I am a transplant in the mountains, and about 3 or 4 months ago, an old friend of mine, Patty Posner, contacted me, and there's Patty, and said that her old friend Marcy McCreary had written a book about the Catskills that that relates to the Catskills. And would I be interested in having a book talk here for our programming at the library? And of course I said yes. We're all about books, and we know we have an audience that happens to love things that relate to the Catskills. So at any rate, the day that Patty put me in contact with Marcy McCreary, that very day, I got my BookBub email that I get every day. And one of the books that day happened to be The Disappearance of Trudy Solomon. So, I mean, it was meant to be. And then just a few weeks ago, when we were firming up this presentation tonight, I also got my BookBub email for the day. And once again, The Disappearance of Trudy Solomon was one of the offerings that day. So this is definitely meant to be. Marcy's connection to the mountains, as we used to call them, to the Borscht Belt. Her dad was the Tummeler at the Brickman Hotel. Patty grew up in Brooklyn, moved to Boston, had a career that was not in writing, lost a job and decided it was time to become the writer she had always wanted to be. And so I am very jealous, because it's something that's always been kind of niggling at me at the back of my mind that I wanted to write a book too. So Marcy has done something that I always wanted to do. This particular book has some connections to our area. It's always fun to read about things. When I knew she was sitting in the Miss Monticello Diner at one point and looking down at the old Down Under across the road. So there's a lot of fun things that some of us will recognize. At this point, I'm going to turn the program over, or the microphone over to Marcy. I have a bunch of questions I want to ask her at some point, and I know that many of you do. If you have a question, I would urge you to put it in the chat, and we will be monitoring that. And if we have not asked the question you were interested in asking, then we'll read your question and we'll get them answered. So Marcy, over to you.
Thank you, Lynn. And you know what? You should take the time off and write the book.
That's all I have right now is time, actually.
So this is the book. It's The Disappearance of Trudy Solomon. And actually, I'm really upset because I forgot my little article where I talk about the inspiration for the book, but I'll explain it. About 3 years ago, there was an article in the Boston Globe, and I actually traced it back to the Monticello Record. So it appeared in the Monticello Record, and then it got picked up in Boston because of a Boston connection. There was a woman named Flora Stevens who went missing from the Concord Hotel in 1975. They investigated what might have happened to her, and they never quite figured out where she disappeared to. Skeletal remains were found on the side of the road in 2017, and they assumed it was Flora Stevens. And when they reopened the investigation, one of the detectives, just on a lark, decided to put the social security number of Flora Stevens into the system, something that couldn't be done, back in 1975. And they got a ping at an Alzheimer's center in Lowell, Massachusetts. And they figured, okay, there were things that matched up, her name, sort of, a birthday. And they drove out to this place in Lowell, and they had her ID with them, her Concord ID. And they also had a picture of her husband at the time. And although she had a different last name, everything mapped out. Plus she had these intense blue eyes that, you can't fake if you're somebody else. So they came to the realization that Flora Stevens was very much alive. It was not the body that was found at the side of the road. Now, I thought to myself, what happened to her? I'm just curious, what happened in those intervening 40 years? Was she kidnapped? Did she run away? Did something bad happen? But when I contacted the Monticello Police Department, they were like, there's no resources to put on a case like that. They found her case closed. And I don't know why it bothered me so much. Maybe because I was in the Catskills in the mid to late 70s, and I never heard the story. The fact that it ended up in the Boston area, which is where I live now, was part of it. And it was just this niggling in the back of my head that, is anybody going to find out what happened to this woman? So I don't think that was really ever going to happen, but I figured it would be kind of fun if I made up what happened to this woman. And so I began to think about my experiences there in the mid 70s versus what has transpired over the last 40 years in the area. And not only can I build the character arcs, I've thought, oh my God, I can really build a geographical arc, the arc of the story. I mean, we're talking about 1970s, I would say the Catskill region was still doing pretty well. Yes, there were a few chinks in the armor that you're about to see, but for the most part, it was okay. And then as you sort of head towards the 80s and the 90s, and then you see the downturn, and now you're seeing sort of like a different type of upturn. So I thought, in the way that you follow a character, it'd be really cool to sort of put that against the backdrop of what was happening in the Catskills regions at the time. So I really saw a lot of meat to this story. Second, my father, was the Tumla at the Hotel Brickman. So I thought, oh, father, daughter, what if the original detective on the case was a man whose daughter was now a detective with the Monticello Police Department? And even though he's retired, he goads his daughter into investigating what happened to Flora Stevens. And in this case, the name that I made up is Trudy Solomon. And so they pair up. And so it all of a sudden becomes sort of like a buddy detective novel. And it's what's called a traditional mystery. There are clues to kind of figure out what, it's a police procedural. You're in the mind of Susan as she uncovers clues. And like any cold case, the way that you uncover clues is going back to old witnesses. And a lot of that is relying on unreliable witnesses who, 40 years have passed and, their mind isn't what it used to be, or the memory isn't what it used to be. And then layer on top of that, Trudy Solomon, who has Alzheimer's. And yet I gave her a point of view in the story. Her point of view comes across in little vignettes throughout the story where she's living in the present, but believes the people around her are the people that were around her 40 years ago. So she addresses them as the people from her past. And it's up to the reader to kind of figure out what's real and what's not in her world as they're going through the story. But the rest of the story is real. Now, Lynn, to your point about like reading about Susan looking across the street and seeing the Down Under. So a lot of, I've taken some fictional liberties here where not everything in Monticello is truly representative as it is. The police department is fictional. And even the Down Under, I changed the name to the Underground. But this is the reasons where it just didn't make sense in the story to be the actual Down Under as I remember it back in the 1970s. And so I kind of put a twist to it. I certainly do mention real things like the high schools and Ciao Bella and and Miss Monticello Diner, which actually plays a bigger part in the second novel. So there's certainly aspects of Monticello and the region that you will recognize, but at the same time, this is fiction, and I get to do whatever it is I want to do. And that's important to keep in mind, Lynn, is that you are writing fiction and you have the right to create the world that you want to create. And I know there are sticklers out there that will say, yeah, but that's not really there, and that's not really there, and Sackett Lake doesn't intersect over there, and there's things you do have to kind of manipulate a little bit to make the story work. But
don't I recall, Marcy, was somebody in your book had gone off to Asheville, North Carolina?
Yeah, so that was my homage. So I have homages, and if you know me and you know the people around me, you will see slight homages in the story if you're paying attention. So it's just this little thing where Susan finds a new house to live in, and it just so happens the person that lived there moved off to Asheville, North Carolina, and that's an homage to Patty, who moved there. So it's kind of fun to kind of determine, if you know me and if you know my family, you know, what little tidbits of information am I putting in there that's sort of, and again, it's an homage. There's nothing real about it. It's just, I wanted to use Asheville so that was my way of saying, hey, Patty, you're in this book.
Can I ask you another question, Marcy? So there was no connection at all to the other murder that took place in the 70s here in the Sullivan County of the woman whose name, in fact, was Trudy Resnick.
No.
Wow.
No.
That was I don't know if you were familiar with it. That was a famous case that happened, I think, in 78.
Somebody told me that. I was like, the name that I pulled the name out of my head. I needed a Jewish sounding name. I needed a name that was a nickname, like, so a Gertrude to a Trudy to a Gertie. So I needed a name that sort of had some variation to it. I grew up with a girl named Carrie Solomon, and the name Solomon just stuck in my head. And then the Resnick, again, I went to high school with somebody whose last name was Resnick, and I do this when I'm doing characters. I run through names in my head, and then I hit upon a name. I'm like, oh, that's perfect. So that's like these coincidences that happen. I can't, like, maybe it was in the back of my mind, but I doubt it because I wasn't aware of the story.
Yeah, that was a woman from whose family owned Channel Master in
Right.
Ellenville. Yeah, interesting.
No, I mean, maybe it was in the back of my head, but I doubt it. Somebody else brought that up to me. I was like, what? No, I mean, so it's things like that. And, you know, and it's funny because I just wrote an essay for a mystery magazine about this sort of blending of fact and fiction when writing fiction. And, and sort of this idea that my characters are completely wove out of nothing. Like, they don't exist. They're not based on anybody, but their experiences are, because I live experiences. So if I witness something or have a conversation with somebody, or I hear a conversation, I jot those things down. I write those things down to use in a book. I just sat next to the nuttiest guy on the plane, and I'm like, this guy's a character in my next book. Like, I'm really scared I have COVID because the guy wouldn't shut up. And he kept taking off his mask and drinking coffee and talking to me. And I'm like, oh my God. And he's telling me how he knows Aretha Franklin. And he's telling me how, he was in jail for 12 years and he knew a Columbia drug lord and he was only friends with whatever. And I was like, oh my God. And I'm like reading, and every few seconds he's like, hey, can I tell you another story? So I'm thinking this guy would be a great character. So that's what I mean. Like, so the people in my book are really characters. They're characters that I love to invent. They're not based on anybody. To me, that's too easy. But the situations they find themselves in, and maybe some dialogue, are based on real experiences that I may have. A lot of people ask me, my writing process, sort of how do you sit down and write, to come up with 100,000 words, for a novel. And I do it scene by scene. And I think writing a mystery or police procedural is very logical, especially police procedural. You find a clue and it leads you to the next clue, which leads you to the next clue, which leads you to the next clue. So there's a logic to it. So I can write scene by scene by scene, and I can kind of just roll with it to a certain point. And then as I get towards the end, I have to really think about, is this coming together? Did I leave enough clues and red herrings so that the reader feels like, I don't want the reader to feel duped, like the criminal comes out of left field. But at the same time, I don't want it to be obvious. And I think that's the hardest part of writing a mystery, of the mysteries that I read, is the reader wants to feel smart and guess something, but I think the best ones are where the reader is going, oh, it's definitely him. And then like the next thing, oh, wait, no, it's her. Wait, it's that guy, right? So like everybody's logical, and it's really up to the reader to become the detective with the detective. Those are my favorite kind of books.
So you're telling us that when you started writing The Disappearance of Trudy, you didn't yet know how it was going to end.
No, I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know how it was I had like 3 different scenarios in my mind, and I was letting Susan take me on the journey to see sort of how it would go. And actually, when I finished the book, it was a totally different ending. So if any of my beta readers are on, like, it was a totally different ending. So I worked with the editor to change the ending. We actually made it somebody else. So I mean, if everybody's a possible suspect and you want to make that change at the end, I guess it's obviously it's doable, because all I had to do is go back and kind of change things a little bit and kind of think of the whole, the beauty about a mystery. It's sort of, everyone's capable of deception, right? For any reason. And so it's Susan, for the detective's job, to discern truth from fiction, to understand truth, what's factual and are people just trying to, bullshit her. And I think, that's what, again, like, as a reader, you too have to figure out by how somebody says something and their mannerisms and the colloquialisms that they use. Is this person telling the truth or not? And so that's where a lot of subtext comes in, not just what the person says, but how they say it and what they're doing at the time and what their eyes are doing and, how their voice is, and doing it in a way that's interesting. You don't want to use adverbs all over the place. I mean, you really do want to describe what someone is doing as they're talking.
Do you develop a favorite character in a novel you're working on? Did you have one in this book?
I did. I think Ray was my favorite character. Ray is Detective Susan Ford's boyfriend, live-in, whatever, partner. And it's so funny because all of my early readers, alpha readers and beta readers, were like, "Oh, we love Ray." Like, like I made him sort of like a really good guy to be around, like just a good guy, really trying to help Susan, but he has his own personality. And I kind of made him a little bit sexy and caring. And so I think he was just a favorite character. I really kind of liked him. I like my villains. I mean, they're just, I'm blanking. I'm like, what's that guy's name? I can't even think. I like my villains because, like, I don't even want to give anything away. So I'm just going to say I like my villains because it's really fun to write. It's very fun to write deception. It's really fun to write somebody who's just shoveling it, and I know, because, so that
would you explain to the audience, what do you mean by alpha readers and beta readers?
So alpha readers are the first people that I allowed to see my book. Patty was an alpha reader, and they're also alpha readers because they know me. So I take what they say with a grain of salt. They tell me they love the book. They probably do, but it's because they know me. So there's no degree of separation there, but they do provide very good input for the first round. Like, they'll say things like, this doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense. And it's mainly they're sort of just talking about the plot. But they'll praise the book as a whole. But there's just so much input I can take from the first group of readers, and it's really sometimes maybe just to make me feel good that I'm on the right track, right? Beta readers are people that don't know me. They might be somebody I find on Twitter. They could be friends of friends. You can find them on Fiverr. They're actually like people as for their living. That's what they do. They're beta readers. I don't like those. I don't like that. I like friends of friends. They don't know me. I can trust them. And they have to be readers, not writers. They have to be readers of mystery. They have to understand the genre. They have to be people that consume a lot of mystery literature and are able to answer like 10 or 15 questions, very pointed questions about the novel, because it's at that point where their input is really going to matter. So even though Patty or my mom might tell me something valuable, it's not nearly as valuable as a beta reader, somebody who does not know me at all. Because, and I say to them, the very end is like, you can tell me that this book is crap. That's what I want to hear, but you have to tell me why it's crap. Like, did it take you 50 pages to get into it. Like, was there too much exposition in the beginning? Does the dialogue not feel real? Does it feel stunted? Like, very specific questions. I'm not just saying, hey, do you like the book, and write up an Amazon review. I mean, this is real constructive criticism that's necessary to then revise the entire novel. I got tons of great advice about the Trudy vignettes. I must have gone through 5 or 6 iterations of how I wanted that to be. There was someone who read the book who said, I don't understand why Vera did so-and-so, and I don't understand why so-and-so did, so some motivation was missing. Why would I need a little bit, why would Vera do what she did, type of thing. So those things are added to the book. And then it's to me feels finished. There's been enough. Not everybody does, not every writer does alpha and beta readers. I think many people don't really care to hear somebody else's opinion about their work, but I don't know, maybe it's my age, maybe it's, I don't know. It's just that I felt that it was a really important part of the process. And most writers I know do use beta readers.
Sign me up for the next one.
But you're not a beta reader, you're an alpha reader. Because we know each other, right? Yeah.
Right, that's correct. Was there a central message to the novel that you wanted to convey to your readers?
I think like if you're going to walk away with any feelings from this book, I think it's the importance of empathy. I think the way that I set it up, so most books, mystery books, suspense and thriller, is good versus evil or justice being served. And I wanted that to come through, my good being sort of this being empathetic, that's good. And evil is being selfish. And so that's my good and evil. And I think that for some people, empathy is not like some, God-given, personality trait. I mean, you have to work at it. You have to walk a day in somebody's shoes to really understand that. And so that's an overarching theme in this story. You've got all the different characters from different walks of life. You have I've tried to put some really topical, current event, controversial topics in here around race and Me Too, and police shootings. I mean, it is part of our culture now to understand, police justification on shooting, whether it's Black teens or just in general. So I felt it was necessary to put that in my book. I have to say, it's funny, I read some reviews on Amazon, and it'll say something like, "Ugh, this political drivel. I don't need this when I'm reading a book." It's hurtful. But I'm trying to write a book based on these characters. Like, this is what this character would say. This is how this character would act. And I've tried to remove myself from the novel. Even though I've put in controversial subject matter, because to me, to write contemporary fiction today and write a police procedural, I don't know how you ignore it. To me, it's a third rail in some ways, but I was willing to touch it. And my publisher didn't have an issue with it. And so I decided to leave it in the book. And it has come back to bite me a little bit, but I'm still standing by it. So, yeah.
You dedicated the book to your dad. Did you have to answer to your mom?
No, because she's a character in the book. No, I'm just joking. She's the drunken mother that just puts down the daughter all the time. No, she's not. She's the opposite of Vera. I think it was very natural, and I think my mom completely supports this idea that this book is dedicated to him, because his life was so tied up in the Catskills, and the book is about a father-daughter relationship.
Right.
So with those two things, it wasn't even like it was I didn't even have to think about it. Like, who am I going to dedicate this to? My husband, my kids, my family? No, it was like my dad. Like, this book is completely possible because of him, right? Whether it's the father-daughter relationship, or it's the aspect of him being the terminal at the cats in, at the Hotel Brickman and Cutchers and the other places he was at. So, I mean, it was, I mean, my mom's on the line here. I mean, obviously it's,
I think it's you, not your mom.
So I was thinking of dedicating my next book to my mother, to even things out. And because there is the subplot is about the mother this time. So there's that relationship between the mother and the daughter and sort of like, and how their relationship evolves. So, maybe it might make sense to dedicate it to her, and maybe like
that could have been a spoiler
another
alert.
One.
Question about your process. When how long a time did it take for you to write this book from start to finish?
Okay, that's a great question. So I was actually writing another book when I had submitted this, and I was editing this, and I was busy writing another book, a domestic thriller, like a domestic psychological thriller. I want to try my hand in that because this is the traditional mystery is an intellectual exercise, and thrillers are an emotional ride, right? And I want to see if I could do it. Anyway, so it was like around March when my book was going out to reviewers, the trade press, like Publishers Weekly and Kirkus and blah, blah. And Publishers Weekly writes a review that says, enticing series launch. Susan Ford is a great character. We'd love to see more of her. And my publisher calls me up and is like, guess what, Marcy? You are writing another Susan Ford, Will Ford novel. I was like, wait, what? And it was about March. And so I started in March, and I submitted it a couple of weeks ago. So however many months that is, 7? March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, 10 months, right? And that was not writing, and I didn't write much in July because I was traveling. So more like 9. So that's pretty typical. I write between 500 and 1,000 words a day. And then when I go to sit down to write again, I read the words that I wrote the day before, clean that up, add some subtext, make sure, it just makes some amount of sense as I lead into the next scene. But I try to write scene by scene. So a scene can be very short and a scene can be very long. So I try to at least get a scene down every day.
So do you have this dedicated place, like you get up at 8 o'clock in the morning and you have coffee, and then for the next 4 hours you're going to be writing, or is it less structured than that?
No, it's structured. If it's not structured, I can't do it. I have to do it first thing in the morning. So I get up, I get my coffee, and it's really the first thing I do. I pretty much spend the morning writing till probably like 12 or 1 o'clock. And then after that, I put together all the social media assets for the next day or the next week. And I do my daughter's social media too. I run her social media accounts. So I have to create all her assets as well. So in the afternoon, I'm generally in marketing mode. And in the morning, I'm in writing mode. But I'm a morning person. My brain functions in the morning. Like, this is really hard for me at like 6, 7 o'clock at night. I'm spent because I've been essentially working all day, in front of my computer, either doing writing or doing marketing. One of the sad things about the last year or so, is the inability to go to writers' conference. I've been signed up for quite a few, and they've, fallen apart at the last minute. The last one was live, New England Crime Bake, but I think if it was to be this week or next week, they probably would have canceled it because we're getting an uptick in cases here. But it's been really that's been, I think, sort of the most disappointing. Here I am, I'm a debut author, and I should be going to conferences and meeting other writers and sitting on panels, but it becomes very difficult when live events are canceled. So
One of my former students wrote a book. I didn't know that she had written it. She was a student of mine in the late 70s, but it was a book I had purchased because it was the title of the book was called Waiting, and it was about waiting tables, and it starts in the Catskills. So of course I was interested in it. And as I was reading the novel, I said, oh my, I think I know this person. And this was in the 80s or early 90s at the latest. There was no internet that I could check. So I actually wrote her a letter through her publisher. And indeed, it turned out to be this young former student of mine who sat in my 10th grade English class. And so we started corresponding. And then I saw she'd written another book, and there was a small write-up in the Sunday New York Times book review section. I was like thrilled for her. So I said, she's now living on the West Coast. I said, well, when you come east for your book tour, please, let's get together. And she said, oh no. She said, there are no book tours for me. She said, Stephen King gets a book tour. So I heard you mention you spend part of your day-to-day marketing. So as a newer writer, you have to do all that yourself. You don't have an agent that takes care of that end of it, or how does that process work, Marcy?
So if you're in a big, I'm with a small press. If you're in a big press, you are going to get a little bit of support. There is going to be a publicist, and you're going to have a little bit of support. But I've heard these days that you really, even if you're at a big publishing house, unless you're one of their top 5% performers, you're really not going to get that much marketing help. My publishing company does a great job on the trade side. Like they'll push out to Library Journal and Kirkus and try to get me essays and literary magazines and all that stuff. They're really driving sort of the business to business side, getting me in Barnes and Noble, that kind of thing. When it comes to consumer facing marketing, the authors are in the trenches, and you can certainly hire a publicist. They're expensive, and it's hard to sort of understand the ROI, unless she manages to get me on NPR or something. For the most part, a debut author is on their own. And so I just rely on the other authors within my publishing house's stable to get ideas from them in terms of sort of what worked and what didn't. BookBub, for instance, works really well. And I happen to land a featured deal, which is like crazy for a debut author, but they did it. So, there's the Bookstagram tours, right? So I found that to be very useful, not just because all of these Bookstagrammers are getting the word out to their audiences, but I can then take that content and turn that into reviews and turn that into tweets and turn that into my own content. So I am learning what's working and what's not working in terms of marketing. I think I'll be so much smarter the next time, like eon smarter. Like I bought a lot of tchotchkes because I thought I was going to do a book tour. I thought I was going to be in front of people and give out bookmarks and these cute little keys. And no, I'm just sitting here with like 300 keys. So where money really should be spent is advertising, Instagram tours, BookBub, and things like that. So I mean, like really just very like direct marketing, where you can really see the numbers tick up on Amazon, when you do something, not buying, book swag, which I guess would have been nice if I was actually signing and handing it out. But it's, you kind of learn what's worth it and what's not. And even timing, like how far ahead out should I be when I start promoting my book? It should definitely be at least 6 months. And I didn't do that. I was traveling in July. My book came out September 7th. And I really should have been like hardcore consumer marketing in March. And I was not. I mean, I really didn't kind of think about it until like July. And that's too late.
So no one wrote a book publishing for dummies or anything that was kind of
there's plenty, but I still, even though you read those things, you're like, okay, well, still, what do I do? And I have a marketing background. That's like the really
Ah.
crazy thing of this, right? I was in publishing companies, but magazine publishing, and I have a background in marketing. And yet it's you're still trying to figure out where to pay for things and what can you do for very little money. And, you want to set a budget and keep to it. So I think in that respect, I really learned a lot. Like I really learned a lot, like when we're ready to launch the new book, it's in a series. So this book, if you want to wait a year, it will probably be free. Like on Kindle, we'll probably do a free deal for the Kindle, not a hardcover, so that you can catch up on the series before the second one comes out. So I'm happy to take this down to give it away for free, to get readers to come into the Susan Ford, Will Ford series, and then sell the next book. So there are little things like that, just tons of stuff like that. So and then I'll have another chance to promote this when the paperback comes out. And then, so there'll be multiple chances to go at it again. But you see how many books flood right into the marketplace every week, and people can only read 1 or 2 books a month. If you're normal, bookstagrammers read every day, but I mean, most normal people take about a week to read a book. And so and maybe longer. So, I mean, and they pick and choose, I have a TBR list, to be read list, this big, and I'm lucky if I get through half of it. I don't, so you have to be so judicious. And so you've got to break through that clutter. Why should they read my book, over, an established author that they know, that they can't wait, that's coming out, that's got a New York Times, it's on the New York Times bestseller. You got to crack through that. And I think it's worth it. I think it's fun. I enjoy the reviews that I read, even the ones that give me 1 star because I mentioned something negative about, policing. What am I going to do?
Interesting. I don't think we established this beforehand. Was there a scene, or did you want to do a reading from your novel, Marcy? Or
does everybody want that? Raise your hands, because I can see.
I would love that.
A quick reading. Okay. So I picked a passage that at least harkens to the area, because usually when I do a reading, I don't. Usually when I do a reading, I start near the beginning of the book when Susan and Will meet up for the first time, and she gives him the news about finding Trudy Solomon. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to a part where I'm talking a little bit about the region itself. But just so that you know who these characters are, because I'm jumping in the middle here. Lori Roth. So the name of the hotel in my fictional Catskills is called the Cutman Hotel, Cuttman. And the owners of the hotel, they're second generation at this point, Stanley and Rachel Roth, and they have 4 children. So there's a lot of characters in this book. I want to throw that out there, but it was kind of essential. I wanted a big family. Many of the Catskill owners had big families. Not Patty, but so Lori Roth, who this passage is about, is the owner's daughter and is Susan's best friend. So they are 12, 13 years old in this scene. It's sort of like a flashback. And it's sort of where Lori Roth and Susan Ford's relationship as, BFFs are sort of falling apart. And again, this is the whole idea of sort of their relationship is sort of following the arc of the hotel region. Lori Roth and I were inseparable from kindergarten through 7th grade. At the time of Trudy Solomon's disappearance, we were still best friends. So I spent a good chunk of my preteen years at the Cutman. The outdoor pool was the grandest among all the hotel pools, Olympic size with 3 diving boards of varying degrees of difficulty. If Lori and I just wanted to hang out, we would head over to the game room and spend every quarter we had on pinball, air hockey, and the jukebox. At night, we danced at the teen disco or sat at the nightclub bar drinking Shirley Temples. As the owner's daughter, Lori was practically royalty there, and she and her siblings were treated with special deference by the staff. None of the Roth kids demanded such treatment. It was just the natural order of things. For many members of the staff, it was a way to get in good with Stanley and Rachel, especially Stanley, who was deemed by many to be demanding, if not demeaning boss. By the end of 8th grade, Lori and I were no longer speaking to each other. So my days hanging out at the Cutman dwindled with our fading friendship. You could say we drifted apart, but that would be kind. There is this moment when your family's socioeconomic status starts to matter. Around 13 years old, when the desire to be popular short circuits girls' brains, is usually that moment. Lori was the daughter of a hotel owner. I was the daughter of a cop. Her mother went to Manhattan to shop. My mother went to the local liquor store. She wore Jordache jeans. I wore Lee's. Our bond couldn't survive class consciousness. After our friendship soured, I would sneak onto the hotel grounds, take a swim, hit the game room, dance at the disco. Sometimes Lori would spot me, but she kept her distance. One night, I got stopped by a security guard who told me Rachel would call the cops next time I stepped foot on their property. Claimed she didn't want the townies using the facilities. I was reduced from best friend to pariah in a matter of months. One by one, the siblings peeled off to college. None of them were interested in coming back to the area to run the hotel. In 1995, Stanley and Rachel sold the Cutman to an Indian guru who transformed it into an ashram. According to Dad, the Roths left the area with a nice windfall to pursue other interests. And so the demise of the Catskills area began. The dirty dancing days were no longer. Other hotel owners were devising their own exit strategies. Vacationers were no longer flocking to the area. The now grown-up kids, the ones who had come with their parents to these hotels, were not enchanted with the rundown rooms, dated lobbies, dilapidated athletic facilities, and kosher menus. The nail was hammered into the coffin when the gambling referendums failed to pass in the early aughts. Potential buyers fled, abandoned hotels crumbled, weeds proliferated, graffiti adorned building walls, sort of like the ruins of the ancient fortress of Masada in southern Israel, without the UNESCO World Heritage Site status. Natalie was right. Natalie is Susan's daughter. Natalie was right. The last 25 years had not been kind to this region. Anyone associated with the Cutman was long gone. Trudy's old friends were God knows where, or dead. I had worked cold cases before, but this one was akin to trying to locate the delicate seeds of a white dandelion after you blew them off to make a wish.
The notion of this dying friendship or disintegrating friendship, was that what was your thinking behind creating this? Was it trying to mirror what was happening with the resorts themselves, or it was just a relationship kind of situation?
It was a little bit of both, but it also has to do with sort of what was coming down the road as adults, sort of them looking back and realizing that each one had a different perception. Again, this goes back to empathy and walking in somebody's shoes. This different perception of how this relationship fell apart, because when they get back together, they remember things differently. And they think it's just, they thought the other one was the one that caused the demise of the friendship, where it was really just very natural at the age of 12 and 13 to drift apart from someone because you have different interests. But certainly they were on two different socioeconomic rungs, so that just played into it. But I think it's just normal. It's just normal for friendships to fall apart. But I needed, like, this year in Susan's life, the year that Trudy Solomon went missing, I wanted it to be traumatic is the wrong word, because traumatic is if, Lori died. I mean, I wanted it to be memorable in a bad way. Like, it was just a bad year. Her parents separated, her grandfather died. She ended her friendship with her best friend. I wanted a lot of like yuck to happen in that year, because she is now forced to go back in time and relive it, understand why her parents separated, understand why she her relationship with Lori ended, understand sort of the family dynamics between the Cutman hotel owners and her own family, and what was going on in those dynamics, and this idea that the grass is always greener on the other side, but it's actually not. It's trampled on and muddy, and it's not what you think. And unless you have that sort of come to Jesus moment, you never recognize that. So a lot of the book has to do with sort of setting up this journey, the character arcs for everybody to sort of come to some new knowledge about their past. And I think that's the beauty of cold case fiction, is that is reliving something in the past and finally coming to terms with it, or learning something from it, or changing it, or redemption in some way.
You just used the term cold case fiction. I've never heard that term before. I understand obviously what it means from your context. So what was the learning arc for you in terms of this genre, learning things like cold case fiction and other terms that you've used here tonight that I have to assume they were terms with which you were not familiar before you started this journey?
They really weren't. And it's important in the publishing industry, and I guess in the booksellers industry, that you understand your genre. Not that you can't bend your genre a little bit or straddle two genres, but you do have to understand your genre. And there is no such thing as cold case fiction. I kind of made that up. Like you can't even find a hashtag, right? But I call it cold case fiction because so many people think of cold cases as nonfiction. They always the cold case has sort of just people conjure up, oh, it's a cold, it generally feels like something that's real. So I've just thrown on the word fiction at the end, and it is a cold case. It's a case that went cold, and Will Ford wants his daughter to, work with him in solving it. So in that case, but to your point about genres, a lot of people come to me and they'll say, what's the difference between a cozy mystery and a traditional mystery, and a police procedural and a detective novel and suspense and a thriller? And yes, these things can be wound together in some way. Mine's like mystery, traditional mystery, police procedural, detective novel, right? All of those things. And you could even say it's an amateur sleuth because Will is retired. So you could certainly be in all of those categories, but you have to kind of pick one when you're marketing it or promoting it into the trades, and even to the reader. So, I try to kind of stick with, if you think of traditional mystery, P.D. James, even Agatha Christie, although a lot of people say she's a cozy writer, there's some pretty, I don't think And Then There Were None or Murder on the Orient Express are cozy in any way, shape, or form. They are, there's murder and mayhem. P.D. James, I think, is the best example of sort of the, really good traditional mystery. I like police procedural. Yeah.
Did you find yourself rereading mysteries you may have read much earlier in your life in order to set the frame for your actual decision to do the writing?
I did. I went back and I read some like Dick Francis. I laugh because even Mary Higgins Clark. So I went back and I sort of read sort of the queens of the genre, including P.D. James. Murder Room is probably is such a great book. So I did go back and read some Agatha Christie and some, just to really to understand the tropes, so that you don't use the tropes, to understand the tropes in order to turn the tropes around a little bit, and not fall into the traps, but also to understand, really there is a formula to this, and to just make sure that I'm regrounded in sort of, the best of the best. I know you like Louise Penny, and that's a really good example of someone to read, to understand police procedural. I mean, Inspector Gamache. So, you have, and it's small town. So she is that on that straddle between the cozy mystery, the small town, Quebec, type thing, and everybody in the village. Like if there's a village, it's a cozy, right? Any British murder mystery that starts off with like somebody opening the door and saying, "What are you doing here?" and get shot, that's a cozy, right?
Okay.
And I don't feel like that's this, although some people have said it, feels a little bit like a cozy because it's in a small town, Monticello. You get to know a little bit of some of the people in the town. There's some eccentric characters, but there's murder and kidnapping and rape, and it's not, it's pretty heady stuff. Plus my controversial subjects, so there's that too, and you're not going to find that in a cozy.
So we have one person who asks, what's next for Susan Ford?
So the next novel is tentatively called The Murder of Madison Garcia. And I don't want to give too much away, but Susan finds a dead body at Sackett Lake. And it's a woman who grew up in the area, but is no longer there, that has some history in the area of something traumatic that happened to her 10 years prior. So there is this sort of flashback to, but the book takes place in 2019 and 2008. So there's an 11-year span, but mainly it takes place in 2019. And Susan Ford and Will Ford, because he's friendly with the grandfather of the victim, we kind of whittles his way into the story in a different way. So in this case, he was brought in as a consultant to open this case with Susan Ford, and he was given permission to kind of be part of it. In the next novel, he is not allowed anywhere near this case. And the fun part is that he manages to just show up, and be part of this investigation where he's not supposed to be. So it's sort of a different dynamic where in this one, Will was pulling Susan along. In the new novel, Susan is like reluctantly having her dad involved in the case, only because he's familiar with the family of the victim. But anyway, so it's more of a straightforward murder mystery, and less characters, because that was, a lot of people said less characters. I'm like, okay. And that, if all goes well, will be out, because believe it or not, it takes a whole year to publish a book. Would come out in January of 2023.
Good luck. Good luck. Mary Page, do we want to unmute people and see if there's some people who would like, in the audience, who would like to ask Marcy some questions? We're working on it, folks.
Okay, I have asked everybody to unmute. If you would like to.
So do you want the individual people to unmute, Mary Page?
Well, I've sort of sent the invitation to unmute themselves.
Oh, okay. So if anybody has a question, you can unmute yourself and ask your questions.
Okay.
Okay.
What's going on?
Anybody have a question for us? If you want to ask a question, you can now just unmute yourself. If anybody is interested in asking a question.
No question?
Well, I'm going to ask a question, Marcy. Do you have a favorite scene in this particular novel?
I love the scene with one of the witnesses, Eleanor Campbell, the one with the birds, the budgies. They go to see an old neighbor of Trudy Solomon, and
Was she the one that lived in Liberty?
No, that's a different character. See, there's too many characters. No, she's Ben Solomon's. The woman who lives in Liberty is Ben Solomon's sister.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the bowling champion. Yeah. Trudy's the character Eleanor Campbell is the woman with the budgies, And she's very obsequious and very like, she wants to help really, she's got a great memory. She's an old lady and she's lonely and she really wants their company, so she's helpful because she doesn't want them to leave. And they kind of they're kind of stuck there. And I make them sort of physically stuck too, where they sit down on her couch and they fall into the couch so that they are literally stuck in her house. And she tries to, she wants to give them coffee and sandwiches and have them stay for lunch. And meanwhile, you got these birds where the birds repeat everything she says. So it's sort of a little comedic relief there in getting information from this woman, in a way that's sort of through dialogue and through sort of circumstance. I just thought it was really fun to write her. I loved her so much. I put her in the second novel. I just could not have her appear as a witness again. And she lives at the intersection of Fireman Camp Road, and Route 42, right? And so she's right there and she sees the car drive towards Sackett Lake by Fireman's Camp. And she sort of reports sort of when she saw the car down by the lake.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. This is Shelley Strickler.
Who? Oh.
We are Marcy's very, very, very proud parents. I want to thank my dear, dear friends, Toby and Patty, for joining us today. And Marcy,
Yes.
I'm thrilled that you dedicated to your dad, who was Mr. Catskill's beloved in the area. But in the next book, are you going to resurrect the mother? I mean, my friends are asking me if I'm really a drunk.
Should I answer it?
I think I've explained this already, that my characters are fictional. Nobody's based on anybody. Like, that's like saying Patty is based on like one of the 4 children from the book. I mean, do you actually?
I'm not. I mean, you sold it to the.
Oh, you wanted to be Meryl, the glamorous.
Right.
Yeah, supposed to be the glamorous. No, my characters are fictional. Vera is very much in the second book. She's a main part of the subplot, especially because in the first book, again, I don't want to give too much away. Her plot line is left hanging. It's the one thing that didn't get threaded up in this book. Everything gets threaded up except for her. And so I really wanted to make her a bigger part of the second book, especially her relationship with Susan and Will, and sort of, again, give her, I don't want to say anything without giving anything away. So just going to leave it there. No,
Okay.
yeah, the mom is the complete opposite of my mother. Like
Oh, thank you, Marcy. Of course, I'm only.
I just
She's
didn't
been waiting for you to say that.
Vera, like the mother, won Miss Monticello, in the 60s, whenever she was a teenager. So, I mean, she was beautiful, right?
Well, yeah, you could tell, right? Anyway.
Anybody else like to ask a question of Marcy?
Hey, Lynn, it's Gordon McAdam. How are you?
Hi, Gordon.
Yeah, I just have some comments, really, not a question. But first of all, to Marcy, I just thought an absolutely fabulous job as a non-writer. I'll leave the writing to my brother. And what I learned in working with him on history novels is really quite different than, what Marcy's describing here, the process of putting this together. I'm a big fan of cold case mysteries, but the real life ones. But her putting this together, of course, set in the Catskills, I think is just fabulous. And your line of questioning was just so helpful in listening to the two of you go back and forth to ask a lot of questions that I would have never thought of. But again, Marcy, congratulations. Just a fabulous job. And Lynn, thanks as always.
Thank you.
You're
Gordon.
welcome.
Appreciate
And for
it.
those of you who don't know, Gordon, who was just speaking, he and his brother did write a couple of books, one of which is on the one-room schoolhouses in Sullivan County.
Oh.
And they've done oops, and there's Mary Page holding it up. They've done a great job of
Oh, wow.
cataloging that. And the other book, Gordon, as I recall, was on a history of your family.
Yes, we did actually, it ended up in 4 volumes, thanks to my brother. But yeah, the family's been in Sullivan County since the 1850s. So we had a lot of history here, and we just wanted to document it. And since my brother is a serious historian, professional historian, I had a great partner,
Yeah.
But a lot of
Thanks,
lot of-
Gordon.
I've really noticed lately a lot of books taking place in the Catskills or the Hudson Valley area, as sort of like just, I think the area speaks to people, whether they live there or not. There's a lot of nostalgia. One of my favorite books that I read this past year was The Last Summer at the Golden Hotel, which is really women's fiction. It's not mystery or anything like that. I went into it thinking, like this, I loved it. And she's not even from the area. She really just interviewed people who were to get a feel for it. And to me, she really brought it home. But I've been reading now, speaking of cozy mysteries, I've been reading mysteries that take place in upstate New York. One is called Batavia, I can't remember. Oh, Winter Witness. And the other one is actually not a cozy. I mean, it's a hardcore mystery suspense called Hide in Place. That was excellent. And so so I'm really finding like writers come out of the woodwork and they're like, oh, I wrote a book in that area. Oh, I wrote a book in that area. So I think you'll see the area depicted, quite a bit.
That's great. That's great.
What's the name of the book about the one-room schoolhouse? Because that's interesting. My dad went to one of those schools.
Oh, did he?
Yeah,
Here in town of Thompson, or where did he go to one-room school?
in South Fallsburg.
Oh, okay. Yeah, our book is only the town of Thompson, but the name of the
Okay.
book, and you can catch it online, is just One Room Schools, ThompsonNewYork.com.
Oh, thank you.
And you'll see the website, and you can look at all of we put up historic plaques at 20 of the one-room schools in the town of Thompson.
That is cool.
Murray and Ben went to one.
And one of Gordon's daughters has just recently been elected to the Monticello Wall of Distinction as a graduate of Monticello schools. So congratulations, Gordon.
Oh, well, thank you, Lynn.
You're
for mentioning
welcome.
that.
Yep, I was proud of her. Any
Yeah,
other questions for Marcy? Marcy, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We love having these kinds of discussions. I know that people love reading and hearing about the Catskills. Please tell all your friends that if they happen to have missed this tonight, they can get it on the Ethelbert B. Crawford Public Library YouTube page. We've been recording this, so it will be up there. And thank you. We really appreciate it. And Patty, thanks for bringing this to our attention.
I mean, I love Marcy and I love the Catskills and I love the Strickler. So it's a perfect match. And that people are writing about the Catskills and putting their stories in the Catskills, for me personally, is just mind-blowing and wonderful.
I agree. Thank
Well,
you.
thank
I've
you,
spent the
Liz.
last 50 years of
Thank
my
you,
life
Mary
here,
Page.
so
I know.
I've come to appreciate what earlier years did for you. So thank you.
So you're now a local.
Well, not quite. I'll never be. Anybody else? So once again, happy and healthy New Year to all of you. Happy holidays. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Happy holidays to you guys.
Thanks, Gordon.
Gordon, you too.